No man will ever respect you, Dad mocked on my first day at the firm. 10 years later, his startup was about to go under. As I walked into the pitch room, I smiled and said, "Remember me, Dad. I'm the lead investor." On my first day trying to work at my dad's tech firm, he looked me in the eye and said, "No man will ever respect you." That moment stayed with me for 10 years as I climbed my way through the finance world. Then one day, his startup, which was flailing, unknowingly came to me looking for funding. When I walked into that pitch room and he saw me sitting there as the lead investor, I finally had a chance to say what I had waited a decade to say. "Remember me, Dad. I don't think you ever forget the first time your parents make you feel like you're not good enough. Not in the disappointed, you could have done better way, but in the you will never be enough way. That moment marks you." For me, it happened the day I walked into my father's firm, portfolio in hand, heart pounding, ready to prove myself. It was summer in Palo Alto, the kind of dry, heat-humming afternoon where the air feels like static. I had just graduated from Stanford with honors, dual degrees in economics and computer science. Not an easy path, but one I thought might impress him, or at least soften his expression, if only for a moment. I wore a navy suit I bought second-hand and tailored myself. It fit like it wanted to be liked. My resume had 4 internships, 3 letters of recommendation, and a cover letter I rewrote 14 times. But when I walked into his office and told him I wanted to work there, he didn't even look up from his laptop. "What do you want, Maurice?" he asked, like I'd interrupted something very important. I told him I wanted a shot. A real one. I could start anywhere: intern, assistant, researcher, analyst. I just wanted to learn, to contribute. He paused, looked up at me, and then smirked. "Are you begging now?" he said. "No man will ever respect you if you try to work your way in through the side door. You want power, you take it, you don't ask for it." I felt everything in me retreat at once. My tongue shriveled behind my teeth, my chest tightened. I stood there, waiting. For what, I don't know, an apology, a laugh to tell me he was kidding. He went back to typing. That was my cue to leave. I walked out of the building and didn't stop until I reached the bus stop. It was 30 minutes before the bus came, and I sat there on the curb, too angry to cry. What do you do when your father tells you you're unworthy? You either let it bury you, or you build a ladder out of it. I built the latter. I applied to every finance and consulting firm that would take a green grade with a bruised ego and a chip on her shoulder the size of a small country. One finally bit, Alaria Ventures, based in San Francisco. They were a smaller player back then, but growing fast. I started in research, but by my second year I was leading deep dive reports for the acquisition team. I kept my head down, worked twice as hard as everyone else, and earned a reputation as someone you could throw into any storm and she'd chart the way out. What most people didn't know was that I went home every night, opened a document I titled One Day, and updated it with everything I learned. Leadership missteps, team dynamics, equity breakdowns, VC behavior. It was half diary, half war journal. And in the margins, I kept a list of every mistake my father's company was making, because I still followed his startup. It was called Alden Insight. He launched it after leaving his consulting firm, claiming he wanted to change how predictive analytics worked in business. He raised money quickly, because of course he did. He had decades of connections. For a while, it seemed like he was going to succeed. But arrogance is the biggest tax in business. And Burton Alden was the IRS. He cycled through executives, treated his engineers like interns, and burned bridges with every partnership he touched. By the time I was promoted to Director of Investments at Alaria, Alden Insight was floundering. Rumors swirled. One of our interns even joked that they were sinking faster than MySpace in a Facebook world. I kept tabs, silently. I never said anything, even when their website went down for 2 days and no one at the company noticed. I stayed quiet even when one of his VPs tried to pitch me at a tech conference, not realizing who I was. I smiled, listened, and said, "Thanks, we'll be in touch." Then I filed the pitch deck away, in my one-day folder. That day came sooner than I expected. It was a rainy Tuesday when Blake, one of our newer associates, dropped a file onto my desk. "Another Series C," he said. "Pretty rough shape, but their tech is still interesting. The company's called Alden Insight." I froze. I played it cool, acted like the name didn't mean anything. "Bring them in for a pitch," I said. I showed up early the day of the meeting. I always did. Wore a gray blazer. Clean, sharp. No jewelry except for the gold ring on my right hand, my mother's, passed to me before she died. She'd never seen me work, but I felt her at that moment. Felt her in my spine. I sat at the head of the long conference table. Our glass-walled pitch room overlooked Market Street. I watched the drizzle fall in sheets, and then he walked in. Burton. He looked older, not in a gentle way, in a worn-down way. His hair was thinner, his frame smaller, the bravado less shiny. He looked at me, and I saw the exact moment he realized who I was. He didn't say anything. I smiled. "Remember me, Dad?" I asked. The CTO blinked, visibly confused. The CFO looked down. He tried to cover. "We're here to walk you through a very exciting opportunity." I let them pitch. I didn't interrupt. I took notes. But the entire time, my father couldn't look me in the eye. Their numbers were terrible. User churn, burn rate, no runway. Their AI model was decent, but there were at least 4 companies doing it better. And their leadership, well, I didn't need to say anything about that. The numbers did it for me. When they finished, I leaned back and spoke evenly. Technology is interesting, but the company is uninvestable with the current leadership. Our condition for investing would be a change in CEO, immediate and permanent. He didn't argue, not really. He said some things, some face-saving things, but I could see it in him. He knew this was the only door left. And this time, he was the one standing outside it. I walked out that day and didn't look back. 2 weeks later, he stepped down. The resignation wasn't announced loudly. No fanfare, just a line in a memo. Effective immediately, Burton Alden will step down as CEO. He will remain on as an advisor through the transition period. Translation. We'll let him bow out gracefully if he promises not to cause a scene. The new CEO we installed, Marcellus Vang, was everything my father wasn't. Quiet, methodical, deeply respected in the compliance tech space. He came from a background in enterprise security and wasn't interested in building fame, just stability. I gave him 6 months of backing and executive coaching, along with a hand-picked operations lead. Slowly, they cleaned the house. Toxic culture, gone. Middle managers who didn't know what they were doing were replaced. They rebuilt the product roadmap with a focus on B2B compliance and leaned into the core predictive analytics Burton had always treated like a side hobby. Meanwhile, Burton sent one email. It was short. No subject line, just, "I hope you know what you're doing. This company was my legacy." I stared at it for a full minute before deleting it. What I was doing wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. At least, not entirely. It was about reshaping something broken into something functional. I didn't want to be the woman who crushed her father's company out of spite. I wanted to be the one who proved I could do what he never could, build something that lasted. For a while, though, the transformation was slow and painful. Existing clients were skeptical. Investors were hesitant. There was a feeling of rot just beneath the floorboards, and we had to replace everything one plank at a time. I visited the team once a month, sat in on roadmap calls, and personally reviewed new client pitches. I made myself visible but not overbearing. I was the face of second chances, not for Burton, but for the people still working there. And here's what they told me. "We always thought the product had potential, we just weren't allowed to say how bad it got. Thank you, really, for taking over, for not letting it die." One developer broke down in a 1-1. Said she'd stayed for years because she couldn't afford to leave, and because she believed in what they were trying to build. But Burton made it impossible to thrive. "He never remembered our names," she told me. "You do. That's already more leadership than we had for 5 years." I didn't say much. I just nodded and told her I was glad she stayed. Somewhere in those first 6 months, I found myself sitting in my apartment in Sausalito, staring out at the bay with a cup of cold tea and a legal pad full of notes. Elise walked in, took one look at me, and asked gently, "Is this about your dad again?" I laughed under my breath. "It's always about my dad." She sat beside me and laid her head on my shoulder. We had met 4 years earlier at a panel on ethical investing. She had a voice like wind chimes and eyes that saw straight through you. When she found out I was estranged from my father, she didn't try to fix it. She just listened. That was enough. "Are you trying to save the company or redeem him?" she asked once. "Neither," I said. "I'm proving to myself that I was right not to become him." I was 35 when we finally secured the buyout offer. A major enterprise software company wanted the new version of Alden Insight for their government compliance clients. It was a clean offer. $120 million, majority cash, no earnout. I called Marcellus and told him it was the right time. He agreed. That night, I sat on my balcony, glass of wine in hand, and watched the fog roll in over the water. I didn't call my father, didn't text, didn't even think about sending him the press release. I knew he'd see it. I also knew that what I felt wasn't triumph. It wasn't even justice. It was something quieter, something sadder. Because in the end, I didn't win against him. I just won, and he wasn't a part of it. I didn't expect to hear from him again. But 6 months after the acquisition, a manila envelope arrived at my office. No return address. Inside, there was a photograph, old, slightly faded. It was me and my mom, high school graduation. I was smiling at her like she'd hung the moon. She was laughing, caught mid-breath. She looked free. On the back, in that sharp, slanted script I hadn't seen in years, he'd written, "You proved me wrong." No name, no date, just 5 words. And still, I cried. Because I had carried that wound for so long that I didn't even know it had a shape anymore. I kept that photo tucked in the back of my desk drawer, under a bundle of old case notes and archived pitch decks. I never showed it to anyone. Not Elise, not my team. It wasn't for them. It wasn't even for closure. It was a marker, a reminder that I'd survived. Some people get closure in a final conversation. I got mine in silence. In the vacuum of everything he never said until it was too late to matter. Life didn't slow down. It never does when you're in my world. But something inside me did shift after that. Not a softening, exactly, but a peace. Like a weight was finally lowered off my back, one that I'd carried since that day at the bus stop 10 years ago when he told me no man would ever respect me. He was wrong, of course. They did respect me, but more importantly, I did. The story started making rounds in investment circles a few months later, not because I told it, but because people started piecing it together. Someone from Burton's old team talked. Then someone else. Pretty soon, it was whispered over espresso martinis at networking events and joked about at conferences. You know, the one daughter shuts down her father's ego-fueled startup and saves it from collapse. Poetic justice in a power suit. People loved the story, but they didn't really know it. Not the way I did. They didn't know about the late nights I cried in parking garages, or the hours I spent rewriting emails because I was afraid of being too direct and too emotional. They didn't know how many men sat across from me in boardrooms and smiled like they were being generous just by listening. They didn't know how many times I'd heard the word aggressive when what they really meant was competent. So I let them tell their versions, and I quietly got promoted. Again. I was now overseeing Alaria's global private equity group, with offices in London, Tokyo, and New York reporting to me. I hired women. I promoted women. I mentored daughters of men who would have said the same thing my father said to me. And I taught them how to smile politely while tearing evaluation apart with grace. One afternoon, about a year after the acquisition, I was invited to speak at Stanford for a lecture on women in finance. After my talk, a student approached me, early 20s, ambitious eyes, anxious energy. "My dad says I should stay in corporate law because it's more stable," she said. "But I want to go into venture capital. I'm good with numbers. I just don't know if I'd be taken seriously." I looked her in the eye and said, "Be so good they can't ignore you, and when they try, walk right through them." She nodded, wide-eyed. "You speak like someone who's been through it," she said. I smiled. "We all have. The question is whether you survive it as a mirror of them or as something better." A few weeks later, I saw Burton again. Not planned, not expected. I was in Palo Alto for a board meeting with a startup incubator and stopped for coffee at a quiet little spot near University Avenue. He was there, sitting at a table by the window, reading a print newspaper like it was still 1998. He looked up, saw me, paused. I thought he might pretend not to know me, but he didn't. He nodded, almost like an acknowledgement. I returned it, just once. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. He knew what I'd done. He knew what I'd become. And for the first time in my life, I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before. Not contempt, not disapproval, but respect. And this time I didn't need it, because I already had mine.